Yes, my name's Claire Colbert. I'm an accredited mediator, child inclusive mediator, hybrid mediator, and PPC. And I'm really excited to be here today with these three brilliant authors. We have Sarah Smith here, who is an accredited mediator. She's going to be talking about the Resolution Guide Parenting Through Separation. We have Dr. Angharad Rudkin, who is a clinical psychologist, talking about her book, The Split Survival Kit. And we have Marcie Shaoul here, co-parenting coach, talking about her book, The Co-parenting Method, 6 Steps to Raise Happy Children After Separation and Divorce. I'm really pleased to have these authors here today because these are books that as a mediator, I recommend all of the time to the clients that I'm working with. So the idea for today's session is to hear a little bit from the authors about the books and what they cover and when they might be useful. There will be a Q&A at the end, so if there's any burning questions you have that you would like to ask them, then pop them in and we'll try and get them dealt with at the end. So, Hotspot's going to go to you, Sarah, first, if that's all right. Talking about the Parenting Through Separation guide published by Resolution. Appreciate, Sarah, you were a family lawyer in your last life, and now
Mhm.
you've been a mediator, running the practice on your own since 2020 at Sarah Smith Mediation Services. I know NCDR is really important to you, including child inclusive mediation, and I know that you approach things in a really positive way, including being a parental coordinator. But now, being a co-author of this guide is another string to your bow. Tell me about the guide.
It still feels a little bit big to say co-author.
Oh, definitely.
There were lots of authors on that. I think, particularly on the editing and trying to get it as good as it can be. And I've got my copy here. I'll just flash up, and we're going to share all the resources as well, so you will have access to it. But this is a second edition of this, and I suppose I came in at the point of really trying to make it even better. There is more stuff out there. There are more things that we wanted to share, and we wanted to sort of, I suppose, pick up the bits that maybe that didn't feel that we'd given enough space to in the first edition, make it as inclusive as it could be. So yeah, that's my involvement. Do you want me to just say a little bit about Resolution and the Parent and After Parting Committee, just for the sort of the background to it? Lots of people on the call will have heard of Resolution. It's an organisation for everyone who's involved with helping separating families, whether that's lawyers, coaches, therapists, mediators, financial people, very much under the umbrella of an amicable separation, making it as okay as it can be. And Resolution's been around in various formats for years and years and years. It's broken down, I suppose, into subcommittees, which is where some of us on the call know each other from. Ours is the Parent and After Parting Committee. And as it sounds, it's about specifically working for parents, providing resources, and for the professionals who help them to make sure that when that happens to you, if that happens to you, that the information you've got is good information and it's accessible to you. So that's the background to the Parenting Through Separation Guide.
So tell me a bit about the guide itself, Sarah.
Okay, so I suppose when it's predominantly for parents, but it could be wider family, people who care for children, grandparents, wider extended families. And I know certainly some of the mediations I've been doing recently, that reach has been quite big. There is something in there for other people who are involved with a child. I also recommend it to, as I say, the professionals who are working with those families. Every lawyer should have one on their desk. I think mediators are very familiar with it. We are sending it out as standard. Yeah, it goes
Always
out.
on our desk.
Always on our desk. And the good thing is Claire will share perhaps a bit later on, is there is a digital version online. So if you're on this call today thinking, okay, where do I get this? You can literally have it in a couple of clicks. You can keep it. Mine's saved on my desktop on my computer. So it's there. It's very accessible. So very much for the parents and the carers of children, but also for those who are helping them. I've heard some district judges say they have it on their desk and they, encourage people to do it. That'd be great if that was wider. So it's really about getting good information out to people when they need it.
And so you mentioned who could use the guide. It's not just parents.
Mm. I think there's lots in there for anyone who's supporting people going through separation. It might be a professional advisor. But I suppose one of the things that really appeals to me about the guide is it's called the Parenting Through Separation Guide, and we deliberately chose that. This is not a one-stop. I read this, I get all the information I need, and that's it. I'm sorted. I never have to go back to it again. And I think one of the things when we were preparing for today as well, when might people access the various resources? And I think on the guide that there's probably multiple points of access. I think there is that initial, it's happened and I don't know where to turn. And you can see what if I hold it up, it's not a tome. This is not something that, is going to take you 6 months to read. And I suspect it's not we've called it a guide. I suspect it's not a book that you will read from front to back, in that kind of traditional format. I think people will come to it as a first port of call. I hope people will come to it as a first port of call. I often think about that emoji. I don't know what its name is, but the one with the half head and the head has exploded on the top. That's an emoji I refer to lots of clients with, because when you feel like that, when your brain is in that fight, flight, freeze mode, you're not going to absorb a lot of information. You're
It's a
not
lot
going
of
to be thinking,
overwhelm.
yeah, you're not going to be thinking very clearly. And I think, even just being able to direct clients, parents to just one page of it, one paragraph of one page of it is really useful. So I think for the guide, there is that initial immediate help, good source of information. And I think that was what I wanted clients to take from it is it was written by people who know because they've got the experience, whether that's legal, therapeutic, mediation, but it's written by people who care. There's a lot of rubbish information out there, and I was sort of thinking when I first started practicing, because that was a long time ago, clients would say to you, oh, well, someone down the pub told me, or my sister's colleague's friend's wife's going through a divorce, and that's how it is. And then it became sort of, I read it somewhere or Dr. Google told me. Now the big, I suppose, resource, let's put it like that, is AI. And there's some good information on AI for sure, but there's a lot that isn't filtered, that isn't tailored. And I think we know that everything we put in here is solid, it's backed up, it's good information that will you be able to absorb at that initial stage and then dip back into as well when perhaps the brain has moved on a little bit from that initial panic to, okay, oh, I remember my mediator gave me that. I remember she said there was something in there about this. And clients will say that to me, oh, that's in that book you gave us, isn't it? And I say, yes.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. So, if you were trying to sum up why this was a must-read book for parents navigating separation, Sarah, what would your answer be?
I think for me, it's not so much a must read, but a must have to hand. Mine literally never leaves my desk, or if it does, it's gone in my bag to go and do something like this. It's very dog-eared now. There's lots of pages. And when we were talking about preparing for today, I knew the pages that I would go to. I know where those bits of gold dust is. So maybe I can just illustrate with a few examples, and then people hopefully will find the way to the guide and they look for the bits that are helpful for them. But one of the questions I get asked a lot about as a mediator, and maybe you guys do too, is how do you tell children that you're separating? When do you tell children that you're separating? And there's a really good section in the guide, I think it's on page 16, where it
So,
talks
so
about,
I'll just share the screen so
thank
people can
you.
see the guide,
Yeah,
Sarah.
really nice to visualize it as well. So
So,
this is the online version that Claire's accessed. This is free to access. You can go to this and it reads like a book online. As you can see, we've tried to make it really visual. And sometimes I know what the page is because I think, oh, it's got that man with the frowning face, or it's got, the little list here. So that, yeah. So on page 16, there's a section that specifically talks about how to have that conversation with your child. And depending on what device you're on, you may not be able to see the link that Claire's on. But I've seen families, I've worked with families in mediation who've actually used that as a template to put their conversation together. That's not an easy conversation to have with children about explaining that your parents are separating. But what that gives as a framework, it gives so you're not working from a blank piece of paper. You've got something that you can build on, you can personalize for your circumstances. So I really like that. I often ask parents to read from page 24 onwards, which is very much talking about communication. And I suppose, and Angharad covers on this in her book. You're not alone in this. Lots of people go through a separation journey, and some of the things that your children and you are experiencing, you're not alone. And that exactly where you've landed there, Claire, is really good about likely reactions. No two children are the same, but there is some common things that children will experience, and I think that's really helpful to know. My kids are not, sort of, do you know what I mean? That it's not unique to them, the struggle. This is okay. This is partly what we
This is
might expect
normal.
to, yeah, this is what we might expect. And if you know that, then you can help them manage it and you can work together as parents on it. There's a lot of what the book talks about is the importance of together. A little bit further on, sorry, a little bit back, Claire, on 22 and 23.
I know the one you're coming to.
The very, very visual plays. This is the most visual part of the book. This is by an organization called the Family Justice Young People's Board. So this is written by children and young people, top tips for their parents. It's brilliant. It's, I suppose most people have got this that they hand out and have got up in their offices. And again, for parents, if you can read that and imagine your children saying some of those things, I use it in child inclusive mediation. There's just some brilliant nuggets in there of, oh, okay, that's something really practical we can do. There's 20 odd tips on there. You find one or two. I think that's really, really useful. And I'll maybe speak a bit more about that organisation when we talk about resources later. And then my favourite page is page 12. This is my go-to, and if I can only get people to read one page, I will ask them to read page 12, which says, what might it look like if we get this right? And I just think it speaks about hope. It's a difficult situation. And if you're sat there on this call today thinking, I don't feel, it feels really hard. Stress is coming from every angle, financial pressures as well as dealing with the emotional. It's really hard to hang on to that glimmer of hope, but you can, get things right. You can put even baby steps in. And I think one of the messages that I would like people to take from this is I don't have to work everything out. I don't have to, suddenly revolutionize what we're doing, what we're facing, how we're trying to help our children. But do you know what? I might pick up one nugget from there, and I might think that is just something that we can really easily do or not do, and take that hope away from it. So yeah, I could talk about this for hours. So probably stop me talking about it
No,
and get
that's
on to the other
really
books.
that's really helpful, Sarah. Thank you. And the guide is available through Resolution. Lawyers can order it on bulk. We've got a QR code that we'll share in a minute. You can get it through Amazon as well. If you just want one copy, it's £8. But if you want a digital copy and a hard copy, you can buy it in that way as well. So we'll share that in a bit. That's really helpful. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for talking so brilliantly about the guide. Moving on now, I'd like to interrogate Dr. Angharad Rudkin, who is a clinical psychologist with 20 years or more than 20 years experience working with children and their families. Angharad trains family law professionals on child well-being during divorce and is the consultant editor for the divorce guide, 101 Questions about Separation and Divorce for Children, which is one of the books we'll chat about a bit later. Um, the book that she's talking about today, though, is a book that she wrote with Ruth Fitzgerald called The Split Survival Kit, and I've got a copy just here. Um, and it's a book for children going through parental separation. Angharad, so tell me, what is the book and when is it useful?
Hello, thank you, Claire. Well, the book is a guide for children roughly between about 7 and 12, 13 years of age, who are going or have been through a parental separation. And Ruth Fitzgerald is a children's author, and her and I had written previous to this a book called Find a Girl Squad, which is about girl friendships. And there was a real thirst for this kind of book, a self-help child-friendly book for non-fiction book for children to use to kind of help them understand difficulty, think about ways through. So we'd published the first book and we were thinking, what else could we write together? What is the need? And we asked around and we found out more and more that though children are being talked about a lot when it comes to divorce, and younger children, there are some very lovely books that younger children can access to think about separation and divorce. There's very little for this age group, this sort of 7 to 13 broadly age group, in terms of what do I do when my parents are divorcing. So we thought, right, great, let's get this book written. It needs it. There's nothing like it out there. We need to get this written. So we wrote it and it was published in 2022. 2022. So when we were thinking about it, like Sarah was saying, for her guide, we were very, very keen for this to be evidence-based, good quality, objective information. We weren't saying, oh, this happened to us, this is how we dealt with it. We were saying, this is what the research is telling us is really good for how to think about it, how to cope with it. So we brought all that research together. And then I was thinking about a therapy model that we could base it on. And I was thinking of all the different therapy models that I've been trained in that are out there. And the one that kept coming back to me was acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. So some of you might have heard about ACT. It's a very popular form of therapy for a whole range of difficulties. And mindfulness is very much at the core of it. But its main thing is about how to cope with and accept difficult things happening. So we can't stop difficult things happening in our lives, but what we can do is choose a different way of thinking about it that will help us get through okay. So this acceptance commitment therapy is very much at the core of this book. So then we had those two pillars, the research, acceptance, commitment therapy, and we started writing. And then lovely Steph Murphy came and did the illustrations, which
Which are
really
beautiful. They're really lovely.
so lovely. They're so lovely. And we were very keen not to exclude any age of child, gender of child, type of child, so we made sure that all the illustrations were very inclusive and accessible. And what we really wanted to do was make it a journey, because we know divorce is not an event, it's a process. And we know for children, especially, their parental divorce that they experience at whatever age they are will stay with them for the rest of their lives, for good and for bad. But it's a big event in their lives and it's a big journey. So we very much wanted this to be a kit, a toolkit for you to take on your journey. So on the cover, we've got a person with a little rucksack. And then the metaphor of the journey goes all the way through the book. So we start off with being told, the very first chapter is, I've just been told by my parents that they're separating. What do I do? So we talk about this kind of need to turn back. I just wanted to go back to how it was. Just only want to start this journey. And then thinking about the emotional storms. So we talk about sadness, we talk about anger, and we talk about mountains of embarrassment. So especially, for example, a lot of the teenagers that I work with, they worry about how to tell their friends that their parents are separating. They say to me, I don't even have the words for it. I don't know when to bring it up. So we discuss that in this chapter. And then we look at negotiating different house rules. We call it border crossings. So you're living now between two houses. How do you figure out how to understand, abide by the different rules in the different houses? And then thinking about new relationships, new family members, new parental people in your lives. And then thinking about future relationships. And again, that's very much based on my clinical work with a lot of young people say, how do I know this isn't going to happen to me? Or if I'm working with sort of mid to late teenagers who are in their own romantic relationships, they'll often say to me, how do I know how to trust them? How do I know this is love? After what's happened to my parents, I thought they were in love, they're not, and it's catastrophic. How can I protect myself from that? Is it better if I don't even get into a relationship? So we very much tackle that towards the end of this book about, okay, so what does this mean for you and your future relationships? And at the very end, we've got a little kind of bit where they can bring all of their thinking together and think about making their own self-support plan. So it's a story in a non-fiction kind of way. It's very much a narrative from beginning, middle to end. But the idea is that you can dip into it at any point. So I know parents have bought it for their children maybe 2 or 3 years after a separation, because they're still dealing now with some of the, for example, the new people coming in, or they're still stuck in that anger stage. So parents buy it for kids at whatever stage. And I also know that parents have read it themselves. So I get feedback from parents who say, well, I bought it for my 11-year-old, but you know what? I started picking it up and I was like, that's really useful. So they even
Useful for them, but also useful for them to help their children.
Precisely, because the more they can understand a child's perspective, and that one of my favorite illustrations in the book is all about perspectives. And you've got the young person on the top of the cliff, and you've got a little monkey at the bottom of the cliff, and it just shows that they're in the same place almost, but they're looking at it completely differently. And I know for parents and their children, this is often the way. Parents is viewing it in one way. Oh, I think my children are fine. I think they're dealing with it okay. And we speak to the children, they're like, actually, I'm not really struggling, but I don't want to tell my parents because I don't want to make it worse for them. And just understanding that different perspective can mean you can start bridging the gap a little bit and start chatting to your child. So so parents can pick up things from it. Parents can initiate conversations based on it. Oh, I was just reading this chapter of the book and I was wondering, is that something that you've ever thought or you've ever felt? Children love it. I know older teens have read it as well. So a 16-year-old said, yeah, I know that book's written for younger kids, but actually I picked it up because it was there for my brother. And I really thought it was okay. And I was like, thank you very
Oh,
much.
when you were writing it, what was that age you had in mind?
Well, that's sort of 8 to 12 and probably broadened 7 to 13 gap,
Hmm.
really, where a lot happens. A lot of independent reading starts kicking off as well. But of course, you can, especially for the younger group, have parents who still read to their children. Um, so that was the core age group, because we know sort of the average age of a child in the UK going through divorce is about 10. So we thought it covers that. But as I say, I know parents who've read certain bits of it to younger children and older teens who've read it themselves as well. But I've also had lovely, lovely feedback from professionals who have used it either in mediation sessions, so they'll refer to a particular chapter, they'll refer to some of the techniques or the strategies that we suggest, and use that as a way of initiating some change as well. So we know that could be really useful for professionals too.
Oh, and some of the activities in the book, because the book isn't just a read, it's a go away, think about what do you think of. I always love the grab a pen example of writing down all the things that you love about your parents, just to kind of bring everything back. And those are great. It's not, some children don't like just picking up a book and reading it. There's pauses, pause, think about this, have a go at this. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. But it's great that those options are in there for them and options for parents to do as well.
With that's it, because at the end of the day, you can't have behavior change without having changes in how you think. So if
Mm.
we're saying to a child, maybe try this, maybe try this, we really need to give them the reasons why we're saying to them, this is a useful thing to do. So each chapter is broken down to this is a theory. And then this is the practice, and we have a grab a pen for every chapter, and
Have a
then as you
go.
say, have a go, give this a go, and it's all about processing it in a way that is going to protect you further down the line from any blind spots. If we get to a particularly difficult point of a tricky situation, we can stop at that point and we never kind of advance. And I know for sure some young people get stuck in the sort of anger stage, or they get stuck in the sad stage. And so being given permission to process it, have a moment, take a pause, take a break, give this a go, and then move on to the next step of the journey can give that real incentive to try different things to initiate that behavior change.
So just like our Sarah, why is this a must-read guide? I think you've answered some of that, but why is this? Why is this a must-read for parents who are going through separation and are trying to help their children?
Well, I hope it does lots of things. I hope it gives a sense of hope. I hope it's fun to read. But it's very, very firmly anchored in evidence and research and a very good therapy model. So again, it's an objective, scientifically based way of helping your children get through separation and divorce. And I think, just like Sarah said, there's an awful lot of information out there these days. And I know for a fact a lot of young people access their information advice now on TikTok and various other social media sites. So it's even more important for them to have just hanging around their house a book that they could maybe pick up that is steeped in evidence and research. So I would say that is what makes it unique and hopefully helpful and useful for parents and their children and hopefully mediators. And yeah, overall, I just want children to know they're not alone. And again, very much like Sarah said, we normalize things. We say this is often what happens. This has happened to you. And for children who sometimes find it hard to say what is going on for them, or even to understand what is going on for them, the reassurance, the comfort, the sense of hope that comes from, oh, it's not just me. Hopefully that is within that book as well.
Can
That's
I
so
jump in? I
helpful.
was gonna say exactly that about it's one of the reasons I really recommend it to people. It goes with the bit that I was talking about this is okay. And sometimes that's
Mm.
what you need is just to think, okay, I'm not the only person in school or whatever. But I really like the idea of the journey that you will get there. Things will pass, and no two people's journey will be the same. I think that's a really important
And it's okay if it
aspect.
doesn't feel great now. It doesn't mean it's
Yeah,
not going to feel
I'm on a
better.
particularly tricky bit, but there's
Yeah.
still that light over there. And the way it's written as well, we've talked about the illustrations and the to-do bits. It feels like quite an informal book, Angharad. That I've scribbled all over mine. It felt all right to scribble on it because it feels like a workbook as well. And it's not a massive read again. When I use it with people, with parents and mediation, I will say you need to read it first. You really do need to read it first, and then give it to your children so that you can
I
get way into
agree.
conversations.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, and that informality, we've just wanted to make it as accessible as possible. And the idea being that, divorce happens to children and they have very little control over it.
Mm.
And so how can they healthily and happily regain some bit of control in their lives? So there's things like a little communication plans. If you do find that you're struggling between two houses or getting stuck in the middle of your parents, how can you let them know, actually, this isn't right for me right now? And so we've got little communication strategies in there and plans as well. So
And other resources at the back as well. So,
Mm.
you're not just leaving them at the end of the book to say, okay, that's it now. You're directing them other places too, so they can get more information in respectable places that we know is going to be good information.
yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. So lastly, but definitely not leastly, if that's a word, we have Marcie. Marcie Shaoul is the author of The Co-Parenting Method, which I have here. Hopefully you can see it. 6 Steps to Raise Happy Kids After Separation and Divorce, published last year. It feels like longer ago. I feel like I've had it on my desk for a long time. My go-to. So Marcie launched the UK's first dedicated co-parenting coaching practice in 2016 and has helped thousands of separating parents transform how they communicate and co-parent. Marcie is part of the Resolution Parenting After Parting Committee with Sarah and myself. And so she was also a co-author of the guide we were just talking about and advises the Separated Parenting Program Directory. Marcie uses both her professional expertise and her personal experience as a co-parent and champions the belief that where it's safe, every child of separation has the right to parents who can still be parents together. Marcie, what a
Yeah,
book!
thank you. Thank you. Well, and what other book, like listening to Angharad, listening to Sarah, it's like, wow, you've got it, we've got all the bases covered.
So what's this book about? I know it says a bit what it does on the tin, but tell us.
So it's written as a framework, really. When we step into separation, when we start to separate and the world is upside down and we don't know which way is up, um, we really feel like we need some anchors, something to stabilize us as we go through that. So the book is a framework. It's a 6 step framework to help parents get to a place where they feel more steady, so they can work together. They don't need to be friends, where they can work together so they can bring up their kids. And the reason that the book exists is really because we want kids to have parents that can work well enough together, because the intergenerational impact of not co-parenting well can be massive. All the evidence and all the research suggests that, long-term children being exposed to long-term conflict is really not great for their mental health. And the long-term impact of that is therefore massive. So that's the kind of the overall picture of the book. But my background has been 15 to 18 years working as a communications specialist in conflict resolution, and all the communications techniques that are in the book are based on very deep, well-known communications techniques that really work. So, like for instance, active listening, we will have all have heard of active listening, but if you can put it into a co-parenting context, it starts to reduce conflict. And so when I separated in 2009, it was like Angharad said, so comes from my perspective. That was the start of my journey with co-parenting. But I realized there wasn't anything out there that propped parents up and helped give them a framework and something to stabilize them as they were going through. So the journey of starting out the co-parent way and then it morphing into the co-parenting method 6 steps has really been one of working with many parents, doing a lot of research, my own experience as a co-parent, but also as someone who worked in conflict resolution. And the book really is for parents to pick up and go, gosh, what do I do? How do I navigate this thing with somebody that I don't like, that I don't massively trust anymore? How can I get to a point where I can continue to parent with this person? And so it's written in a really accessible way. It's got a couple of illustrations in, nothing like the amazing ones in Angharad's book, but it's supposed to be a handhold, a guide, a guidebook, if you like. You go to there's the example in the book, you get on an airplane to go on a holiday and you think you're going to the Caribbean and you've packed accordingly, but you get off the plane and you realize that suddenly you're in Alaska and it's cold and you don't have any of the right equipment anymore, the right clothes, the right things that you need to be in a cold place instead of a warm place. And the book is like that. It's your guide to go to something through something unexpected and something that you haven't prepared for. And I really wrote it with that kind of wanting to give parents that support as they were in this difficult moment in their lives.
That's really helpful. So if I'm trying to think when a parent should be picking this book up, is there a right time? Is there a good time? Or from what you've said, could it work at any time?
I would say pretty much at any time. I mean, if you have a magic wand, ideally, before parents get too entrenched in any conflict, they would pick it up, they would read it, they would realize the long-term impact on their kids if perhaps they don't step into a place where they can work together. However, we have parents who read it many, many years down the line, who write in, they say, I wish I'd read this earlier. Um, or they come on our program, which is based on the book. But they can pick it up at any time because really what the method is, it's 6 steps. It's stepping into a long-term mindset, so understanding that impact on kids. And then it's managing, the emotions that you're feeling when you are in this situation and how to self-regulate. Because if you can't regulate your emotions enough, you can't, it's very difficult to then communicate well. So we really want to help parents just manage enough to be able to parent together, and then it kind of then deal with whatever's going on with some support, some therapy, their friends. And then the third step is setting boundaries, because we need boundaries as co-parents. We don't need barriers, but we do need boundaries. And there is a real difference between boundaries and barriers, because we want to protect ourselves, protect our children. But if we're obstructive, then that leads to conflict. And then the fourth step is kind of that builds on the first 3 steps, and that's all about communicating without conflict. It's all about how to listen well. If you think, Claire, that you go in, you're having a conversation with someone, and if someone doesn't let you finish, it can be quite galling. Whereas
Mm.
if someone lets you speak fully and lets you get to the end of what you're saying, you're immediately calmer. You're much less likely to throw fuel on any fire. And so we teach parents through all the book is full of practical tools. It's got 20 practical tools in it. But one of my favorites is the active listening tool, how to listen with an open mind, how to not interrupt, as well as the language that perhaps you shouldn't use, reframing things to see other perspectives. How do you turn this difficult situation into something that's maybe a bit more positive? And then when you can do those 4 steps, we lead into, okay, so now you can do that. How do you make some solid, robust decisions with your co-parent? And then finally, it's into surviving to thriving. And that's
I love the
really
name of that chapter. I love that. I think that's great.
but it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it could be quite misleading, because it can sound like very right, let's all be zen and calm, but really it's about looking at what can you control and what can't you control, and how do you manage the things that you can't control, and how much do you let them get on top of you, and what can you do in that situation, because we can only control our own behaviors, and that's kind of a small amount of our life is what we can control. And so how do you interact with the things that you can't control? Because that can be really exhausting if we're focusing on someone else's behavior, but we actually don't have any say in what they do. So the framework is I like to think of it as a kind of like steps. The first step is the foundations of a building, and then the rest of it's a building, and the roof terrace, with the swimming pool, is kind of step 6, where everyone can just chill out and let go a little bit.
That was what you wrote into my copy, Marcie, before you
Was
signed
it?
it. Every step forward counts. So
Oh,
it's on the
there you
front
go.
page of my book. But I mean, on that point, by the sound of it, you don't need both parents to read it. If one
No.
parent reads it, even them taking the steps on board that you've talked about can make a huge difference to how the other parent reacts.
Absolutely. The book is the communication styles and the way that we word things in the book is very specifically designed for one parent, because it's not always the case that both parents want to come into co-parenting. But what we know about human behavior is that if one person just changes the way they show up in a situation, then very often what comes back at you is different. So if you go into a restaurant and you're really rude to the waiter, there's always that worry that someone might spit in your soup. If you go into the restaurant and you still might be feeling rubbish, but you're polite to the waiter, you're much more likely to have a clean bowl of soup, right? Than something
Let's
else.
hope.
Let's hope. Let's hope. But I know it's perhaps a silly example, but I think it brings across the point that, what you put out is much more likely to bring back something positive. And we can take control of that. So that step 6 piece I was talking about, we have control of how we behave. We have control of how we speak. And the more we can regulate, so using step 2, the more in control we can be. And the whole point of all of that is not to get a nice bowl of soup, but it's to make sure that our kids can grow up with parents who are in control of their own behavior and who can make decisions together and who can stop some of that negative impact on them. So, all 3 of these books together really prop up separating parents and their children. And I think that, they're really good resources.
It's that support that parents need
Yeah,
when they're not sure what to do next or where to turn.
definitely, definitely.
Well, I think you've answered my last question, which is why is it must read?
Exactly for that reason, get a guide, get some help, get the 3 books here. There are lots of things out there, like Sarah said before, that are not helpful. So take the things that are helpful, and like Angharad said, dip into what you need when you need it, right? Ideally, you read the co-parenting method step by step. But if you are like in a communication crisis, for goodness sake, open it to step 4. Like there's no right way or wrong way to do it. You take what you need when you need it because everybody's needs are different.
And you can use it with other people, not just the co-parent. I mean, some of the communication tips in there I found I've used in other environments and just
Yeah.
thought, thanks, Marcie, that was quite handy. I hadn't thought of doing that, but the
Yeah.
guide gives you those tips. It's brilliant. Thank
Thanks.
you.
You're welcome.
We thought it might be helpful just to kind of put these books and how they might be used or how they might be useful into context. So we thought a case study might be quite helpful. And with all of our backgrounds, we all love a case study. So we've got a bit of a case study of a situation that quite often all of us would see in our professional roles. And so I'm afraid we've gone with Victoria and David, which is probably a bit too topical at the moment. But Victoria and David are separating and they've got 3 children. Don't know where the 4th one's gone. Alice is age 15 and doing her GCSEs. Bella is 11 and waiting to hear about secondary school places. And Charlie is 8 and just likes Minecraft. Now, things are very tense at home, and David and Victoria are trying to keep this away from their children, and they think that they might be picking up on what's going on with their parental conflict. As parents, David and Victoria are struggling with how to talk to Alice B and Charlie about moving into 2 separate homes. So I've got this very wise panel here. Where could your book be helpful to Victoria and David? I don't mind who starts.
I mean, a lot of the facts in there are very common. And I was thinking about particularly the stages of the children. They're different stages, they're different ages, and they're different sexes, aren't they? And I know that's one of the things that I will talk to parents about in mediation. And one of the things that children and young people give us feedback when I do child inclusive mediation is they're not a lump, it's not the kids. We know why we refer to them as the children, the kids, but there's hugely different needs in there. And the thing I suppose that I was thinking about in terms of the guide and answering the questions is it does talk about that initial conversation. Lots of parents say to me, well, how and when, and there is no magic answer for that, of course. But what the guide does is talk about, I suppose, things that are helpful, making sure that it's a joint conversation together, the one that you plan out, keeping blame out of it. The children knowing what they need to know what's happening, the factual stuff, not the adult stuff. I often talk to parents about keeping the parent and adult stuff separate. But this is not too far away from it's something I've been dealing with quite recently, and parents really struggling about, our eldest child is coming up to GCSE. Do we go now or do we wait until knowing that the situation at home is getting more tense every day? And so I didn't profess to come out with an answer to that in mediation. Maybe Ankara can help with a psychologist head on. But I was just saying, what are you concerned about? Because it's never going to be a brilliant time to tell them. So what are the real worries? And I think what came out in the situation I was dealing with was probably that the children knew quite a bit more than maybe was coming out anyway already. And it talks in the guide about not necessarily having to have a fully formulated plan as to what will happen, that it's okay to sort of say to children, this is as much as we know now. And I think that the family I was working with in particular, their concerns were going to be the same, whether it was now, whether it was in June, it was about that moment. So I don't know if Angharad, has got thoughts on particular tips of when to have the conversation or how to have the conversation.
I think it's a really important thing to consider with no easy answer, really. I've worked with kids where the parents did wait. In fact, they waited till they left home. And these 18, 19-year-olds are devastated because by their parents, bless their hearts, kind of thinking they're protecting their children by waiting till they're all left home. What they've inadvertently done is create a sort of a myth around the family. So these 18, 19-year-olds look back and they say, well, hold on, if they were just waiting for me to leave home, has it all just been a fake, this family life, this happy family life that I thought I had? Is it all just been a pretense? So really, there's no right way of doing this, no right time, like you say, Sarah. It's not going to be any perfect time to do this. But by doing it carefully and thoughtfully, and with each child's needs in mind, I think that's the best way of doing it. So, for example, the table in your guide, Sarah, about at different ages, what can be the kind of particular issues that come up. And thinking about this family, you've got someone about to do the GCSEs, you've got little Charlie who's just in his Minecraft world, and you've got the young-year-old in between. And actually, with my book, for example, it could cover all of them. And what we know is that siblings can be an immensely helpful resource for children as they go through separation because they're going through it together. But unfortunately, what we also know is that a lot of sibling groups get shattered in the midst of divorce because of their different ages and understanding, maybe genders, maybe relationships with parents, that one will go with one will go with the other. It can all get very, very difficult and fractured. So, for example, a split survival kit could be a resource that all of the children access. Maybe the older one can read it to the younger one. Maybe they can talk about what chapter is particularly relevant to them at that point.
Or do some of those tasks together from the
Do
book.
some of the tasks together, absolutely. Just to highlight that even though you're all different ages and context of life is different right now, and you've got different hormone levels and physical and neuro kind of psychological things going on, that actually we're all in this together. And I think that sense of unity, even in a fractured family, can be really useful for children to hold on to. Yeah.
And I also think that the words that we choose when we speak to them are really important. So the language, the communication, the language aspect. So you touched on it before, speaking to kids at different ages, you'll do it in different ways, not oversharing, right? They don't want to know all the gory details of why you're separating or why you're getting divorced. They just need to know that they are safe, that you still love them. That's something that we talk about a lot in the co-parenting method is don't assume that your kids know that. You have to articulate it. You have to tell them, look, I'm your mum. I love you. I love that your dad loves you. He's still your dad. That's not going to change.
That reassurance.
Really, really, really reassure. And please don't do it once. Keep doing it, right? Because kids are like, they absorb everything and sometimes they remember nothing, right? So it's about continually reassuring them and using your words and your body language and the way you make them feel. Spend some one-on-one time with them. We talk about all sorts of things around kids, but really the simple things are the things that are the most important. Don't overshare. Tell them that you love them. Remember, like Angharad says, that there are different things things at different ages. That's in the guide. It's also in the co-parenting method, different things that you can look out for as well that happen to your children or might happen to your children. But please, please remind them that you love them regularly and that it's not their fault. You know, I had a case recently, and the parents have been co-parenting really, really well for a long, long time. And the child found out something about why they'd got divorced and made an assumption that it was their fault. And actually, it took months before the parents realized, and then they kind of went back and they're like, "Of course, it's not your fault." But again, you know, that children hear things like the cliff that Angharad was talking about before. Children hear things in different ways than what how we assume that they hear things. And in the co-parenting method, there's a whole section on how children, you know, hear what you're saying and thinking about, you know, the language that you use. So if you say, "Oh, just keep your eyes peeled for a parking space," kids can be very literal. You know, we are not peeling our eyes here, but we need to explain what we mean in appropriate language.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate we've talked about the books that we've discussed today, the three must reads, but in all of our professional roles, there are lots of other books and resources we all use. Are there other ones that we would recommend to Victoria and David, or other ones that we'd recommend to parents or professionals on the webinar today?
I'd
I've
recommend
got one, so afterwards I will make sure I share my one.
I'd recommend a new resource actually that's come out, and it's a charity and it's a website called the Separated Parenting Program Directory.org, and I'll put that in the chat in a minute. And it's a charity that's been set up to house all of the separated parenting programs that exist in the UK, and they have to meet certain standards, certain requirements. It's not a book, but it could be quite a useful resource for any either professionals as a signpost or parents who are listening. I'm going to put the website in the chat right now for you all.
Thank you, Marcie. That's helpful.
I stick with the charities, and this is a free resource. And every time I say that, I think I cannot believe that this is freely available. So there's an organisation called Restored Lives. I'll also put it in the chat in a moment. And there's two aspects to Restored Lives. The Restored Lives main sort of umbrella is for adults going through separation, and there's a load of good resources on their website, and they run courses. I think they're all virtual, so sort of group participation. So it's not as heavy if sort of one-to-one or therapy makes you feel a bit apprehensive. It's kind of that group community learning. But the bit that I'm most passionate about is they've got the umbrella called Your Direction, which is for children and young people, and it's that bit that really gets me excited because
Really brilliant.
yeah, there's a sort of, you know, children don't stop being children at 16 or when they do their GCSEs here, do they? There is a bit afterwards, and picking up on what you were saying, Angharad, about, you know, children go off to university and then find out about it, and they're like, well, hang on a minute, you know, how do I fit in? How do I come back home and to homes and those sorts of things? So yeah, Restored Lives and Your Direction, they run free courses, and the children's ones are broken down, I think, into up to 17 and then 18 plus. So it's very much for young adults as well. Absolutely brilliant. I mentioned Family Justice Young People's Board, which is quite a mouthful, but I have recommended that as a resource, particularly when I've seen children in child inclusive mediation. I've followed it up afterwards and said, you know, this is available, and they have, along with the National Youth Advocacy Services, ways for children to get involved. And I think for not for every child, but for some children, that feels like, you know, sort of using their experience to go on and help other children and young people going through it. So some of the kids I've worked with have really liked that idea that they can get involved and they can have their say, and there's policy and all those sorts of things as well. So there's lots of good stuff coming through. I'll put those in the chat.
Well,
And
I was going to embarrass you there, Angharad, because I've got books that you were editor of. So I've got Only Mums and Dads 101 guides, and they are absolutely brilliant. So the Separating with Children 101, which is brilliant articles for parents that, again, is real information, useful information to make sure it's not AI. It's not taking us down paths that we don't want to go down, and covers all of the different issues that parents face when they're separating and divorcing, but with really good, sensible advice from experts who know what they're talking about. So apologies to embarrass you there for another book that you've been part of, Angharad.
Well, thank you, Claire. Well, it's a nice way to be embarrassed, isn't it? It's better than falling over on your face in the street.
Absolutely.
There are other ways of being embarrassed. Yes, and may I do two, if at all possible? I find there's a Professor Jennifer McIntosh, Professor Jen McIntosh in Australia, who has done so much incredible work around child need in divorce. And she's got a report, and it's from 2009, so I think it's a long time ago, and yet it's still so relevant. And it's called Because It's for the Kids, Building a Secure Parenting Base After Separation. And it's still very relevant. So really very readable. It goes through different ages for children. I find that really, really useful actually to keep referring families and professionals to. And the second one, if I may, is I worked very closely with Separate Space, who are app for parents going through separation. And we created a free interactive ebook called My Parents Are Divorcing. So you don't have to be a member of Separate Space to access this book. It's just there. And it's just a short interactive book looking at sort of the key times of, how to tell your kids, how to tell school, what about their anger or their sadness, that sort of thing. Just a very short book, but again, is free to access and hopefully gives parents some sense of this is some of the things that we can do to help get us through.
That's brilliant. So helpful. Thank you. In terms of today, we were open to any questions. I just want to share my screen so that you've got details of the books that we have talked about from the authors today. So apologies, I probably should have shared this a bit earlier. So this is who the people that we're talking today. And if I do the next slide, you'll see these are the books. Now, all of the books here are available on Amazon. They're the authors that you've heard, and there is a QR code for the resolution guide that if you wanted the digital copy as well, that's a discounted rate for Family Mediation Week. So that information will be available on the recording that comes out on the webinar if you haven't got time to look at the links now, but they're all available. If you just do a quick Google, they should all come up as well. Now, we have said that we're happy to do a Q&A, and I think we've got one question that's come in so far that we haven't managed to answer whilst we've been going. And that question was, if you have read one of the books or the guide, have we got any tips on how you would also suggest your ex reads that? Panel,
It
tell
really
me.
made me smile. That's why I put answer live, because I think it's a really good question, and so many people feel that frustration. I've read it, but what? A couple of things came to my mind. Nobody likes being told, so I think the worst thing you can do is tell them to read it. I have bitter experience from that from the workplace of somebody insisting that I read a particular management book, and I may not have reacted very well to that after I read it and didn't get anything from it. So definitely don't tell them to read it, because that will probably backfire. There's a whole psychology, isn't there, Angharad, about someone thinking it's their idea and something that they can buy into. But when I've done some training in the past and I use it in mediation, the importance of using the word willing. Would you be willing to read it? Apparently is easier and more accessible than saying you have to read it, or, that kind of thing, or I've read it, why won't you read it? There's something about the use of the word willing. It was a language professor from Loughborough that was talking about it, and I've hung on to that and I use that in my practice, that the idea of inviting someone to do something. They were my two ideas.
Those are great. I love that willing piece. The other thing I get asked this a lot, actually, how can I get my ex to come on the program? How can I get my ex to read this book? Definitely don't order them to do it, and don't send them a surprise copy in the post. But probably you can say, look, let's try and make this work as well as possible for the kids. If we both read this, then it could really help us. Or, so bringing it back to the kids is really good, because it's much more likely to get a positive response. Whereas if you're asking your ex to do something, that's less likely to get a response. So it's about invoking that kind of feeling of responsibility, that parental responsibility.
Mm.
And my just tips on top of those, agree with all of them, would be that there's, maybe a 1% chance that your ex might read the resources if you say to them, these resources are available out there. And without sending it as a surprise through the post, having a copy that you could hand over to them or put in your kid's bag or something like that might increase the probability to 2%, which is double 1%. So I know, for example, that some parents with the split survival kit, they've bought a copy for each house. One parent has bought a copy for each house. And so it's not a threat. It's not saying, to the other parent, you've got to read this, but it's just like, I think it's better for our kids if they've got access to this in both houses, and then chances are the other parent might kind of pick it up and start reading it. So very much not to force, but to kind of make it as likely as possible that it's around, and therefore something that on I don't know, a bored 5 minutes, somebody might pick it up or might click on the link and start reading it.
I always say blame me to my mediation
Yes, that is a
clients.
good one. Yes, I
I will
do.
say, I've said read this book. I've said it's brilliant. And so if you're really wanting somebody to read one of the books, say that somebody you know has recommended it. Someone has said that you should both read it. And if there's an element then that's not you suggesting it to the other person, there's no fault, there's no blame. Blame somebody else for saying it was really good. And then if you both think it's rubbish, you've got somebody else to blame. But it does mean that it takes the pressure off the person that's suggesting the book from saying it was their idea. So I always say, blame me, blame the mediator.
And the other thing that reminded me, Claire, is I will, particularly on the guide, which is only 40 pages anyway, I will still say, read this page, or
Page
this
12.
paragraph of this page, because like Angharad was saying about the percentages, I think, okay, you're not in a place to read and absorb all of it, but just let's do that. And I do specifically set it as homework and say, please confirm you will read that before you come to the next session. And I think people will buy into bits of it. And I also think as parents, even when things are difficult, you can get most parents to the point of saying, okay, forget everything that's going on up here that we think about each other, don't think about each other. Going back to the kids, I think most people can drop their focus, into that space, and it's a little bit of an easier sell.
Well, I think we are told our time is nearly up. So all I can say is many thanks to you for your attendance today, and thank you to our brilliant speakers for coming along and talking to us about their fabulous books. We hope it's been helpful. Hopefully you'll be able to rewind back on the recording of the slide to look at the links to the books, but all of our contact details are around. So if we can help in any way, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.